My daughter, who is a tiny little thing, just over 5 feet and light as a feather, left work one night. She's a cook in a late-night establishment. It was the early hours of the morning, and the streets were quiet. As she walked towards her car, she heard shouting and could see a commotion further down the road. She quickly realized there was someone on the ground, and several youths were hitting him and attempting to relieve him of his bag and phone. My daughter froze for a second, unsure of what to do. She had no weapon, no means of defense, and no one around to help. As she tried to sneak away, one of the attackers spotted her and started running towards her. My daughter turned and ran as fast as she could, but the attacker was closing in on her. She could feel his breath on her neck. Just when she thought she couldn't run anymore, she saw a gas station up ahead. Without a second thought, she darted inside and locked the door behind her. She could hear the attackers banging on the door, but they eventually gave up and left. Shaken, my daughter sat down on the floor, trying to calm down. As she sat there, she noticed a man standing in the corner of the store. He was tall and dressed in all black. She couldn't make out his face, but she could tell he was watching her. Feeling uneasy, my daughter got up to leave, but the man stepped in front of her. He didn't say anything, but his presence was intimidating. My daughter tried to move around him, but he grabbed her arm and pulled her towards him. Suddenly, the man's face changed, and my daughter saw something that she could not explain. His eyes turned black, and his mouth opened impossibly wide, revealing rows of sharp teeth. She felt like she was going to pass out from fear. The man released her and disappeared, and my daughter ran out of the store as fast as she could. She got into her car and drove straight home. She didn't tell anyone what had happened to her, not even me, until several months later. After the incident, my daughter had trouble sleeping at night. She kept having nightmares about the man in black, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Her behavior changed too. She became more anxious and easily startled. One day, I noticed a strange mark on her arm. It looked like a symbol, but I couldn't make out what it was. My daughter didn't remember getting it, but she said it hurt when she touched it. Things only got worse from there. My daughter's behavior became more erratic, and she started seeing strange things. She would often wake up in the middle of the night, screaming and shaking, claiming that the man in black was in her room. We tried everything to help her, but nothing seemed to work. She was losing weight, not sleeping, and had stopped going to work. We took her to see doctors and therapists, but they couldn't find anything wrong with her. One day, my daughter disappeared. We searched everywhere for her, but she was nowhere to be found. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. Years have passed, and we still don't know what happened to her. But sometimes, when I'm walking down the street, I see a tall man dressed in black, watching me. And I can't shake the feeling that my daughter's disappearance is somehow connected to him. The memory of that night still haunts me, and I can't help but wonder what would have happened if my daughter hadn't run into that gas station. Would she still be with us today? I was 12. I woke up to a rough shove, assuming that my sister was waking me up. It was early morning, about 7:30. I groggily stepped out of bed and was hit with hairspray fumes. I heard the sound of someone taking a shower, as well as loud hurried footsteps and repetitive spritzes of the hairspray can. I walked to the dresser and pulled out a blouse and a skirt. As I got dressed, I heard knocking on my door. I pulled my top fully on and opened the door. There was no one there. I was kind of freaked out right now, but I knew that it must be my imagination, as I was about half asleep at the time. I exited the bedroom. I heard the shower shut off as I passed the lavatory, then my father's heavy footsteps. At the end of the hall, there was another restroom. I heard repetitive spritzes coming from there and called to my mother. "Hey, Mom, I need to pee, and Dad's in the other bathroom." I heard my mother's voice, "Alrighty." It was definitely her voice, but alrighty was not something she had ever said. I rolled my eyes and walked away. I figured that I should wake my granddad, as I heard heavy snores coming from the room that he was sharing with my parents. I wondered why my parents hadn't woken him up. When I opened the door, I was scared to see that the room was empty. Just then, the noises and the smell of hairspray stopped. I ran downstairs and saw that my roommates were already eating breakfast. I checked my watch and saw that it was already 10 o'clock. My mom stared at me. "Why are you so late?" "You slept in and missed breakfast," she said. I was confused. "What are you talking about?" "I heard you in the bathroom, and Dad, and Granddad." And then the hairspray stopped, and I came downstairs. "What's going on?" My mother looked at me with a concerned expression. "Nobody's been upstairs this morning, sweetie. And your granddad passed away last year." I was in shock. What had happened that morning? Was it all just a dream? But the hairspray fumes were still in my nose, and my blouse still smelled of it. I couldn't explain it. Over the next few days, strange things kept happening in the house. Doors would slam shut on their own, and we would hear footsteps in empty rooms. The TV would turn on by itself, and we could hear someone whispering when there was no one around. I was scared out of my mind. I didn't want to stay in that house any longer, but my parents refused to leave. They said it was just our imagination. One night, I was lying in bed when I heard a strange noise coming from the closet. It sounded like something was scratching the walls. I got up and slowly walked over to the closet. I was terrified. When I opened the door, I saw a figure standing in the corner. It was a man, dressed in old-fashioned clothes. He had a stern expression on his face, and his eyes were fixed on me. I was frozen in fear. Suddenly, the man vanished into thin air, and the scratching sound stopped. I ran out of the room and woke my parents up. I told them everything that had happened, but they still didn't believe me. The next day, my parents decided to call a paranormal investigator to check out the house. He spent several hours investigating and found evidence of a ghostly presence. He told us that the house was built on the site of an old graveyard, and that the man I had seen in the closet was likely one of the people buried there. My parents finally agreed to leave the house, and we moved to a new place soon after. But I'll never forget that experience. It was the scariest thing that ever happened to me. To this day, I still wonder about that man in the closet and what he wanted. But I'm glad I don't have to live in that house anymore. At work one evening, working in a call center and bored senseless. It was snowing heavily and the phone lines had gone down, so we had nothing better to do than chat and look out of the windows. There, in the middle of a main road, was a guy dancing up and down with a box on his head. We have no idea why he had said box on his head, and I'm not talking a little shoe box he might have grabbed to keep his head dry. I'm talking a box, like the ones a washing machine comes in. It covered him from his head to his waist, had no holes in it, and wasn't decorated at all. It was just a plain and simple cardboard box. And he was dancing in the snow in it. We all stood there watching him, wondering what he was doing and why he was doing it. Suddenly, he stopped dancing and looked straight at us, as if he could see us through the snowy window. His eyes were empty and lifeless, and we could feel his gaze piercing through our souls. We all felt an overwhelming sense of unease and terror. Just then, the power went out, plunging us into darkness. The only light came from the moon, casting eerie shadows throughout the room. We all felt like we were being watched, and the feeling of unease continued to grow. Suddenly, we heard the sound of footsteps, but they weren't normal footsteps. It sounded like someone was dragging something heavy along the ground. The sound got closer and closer, until it stopped right outside our door. We could feel something watching us, but we couldn't see anything. It was like there was a presence in the room with us, and it was not a friendly one. Just then, the power came back on, and we all let out a sigh of relief. But the feeling of unease lingered in the air, and we knew that something was not right. We decided to go home early that night, and as we walked outside, we saw the dancing box man standing in the middle of the road. He was still wearing the box on his head, and his eyes were still empty and lifeless. We tried to ignore him and walk past, but he started to follow us. We quickened our pace, but he kept getting closer and closer. Just as we were about to break into a run, the dancing box man stopped and lifted his box up to reveal a gruesome sight. Inside the box was a severed head, and it was staring right at us. We screamed in terror and ran as fast as we could, not looking back until we were a safe distance away. From that day on, we all had nightmares about the dancing box man. We never found out who he was or what his motive was, but we all knew that we never wanted to see him again. To this day, I still get chills whenever I think about that night and the dancing box man. It was a night that will haunt me forever.